Chicago, how is a Republican mayor going to bring down, what are they averaging now? 500 homicides a year? Are you just going to add like 100,000 more cops? Like, what would a Republican mayor do differently?
Well, you know what? I sit here and I think about Indiana. I'll let you go, Hakima. Hakima, you tell me if you agree with this. Because, you know, I've told you I live quite close to the border of Indiana, which is a red state. Okay? And in my opinion, those boys in red, they don't play. I rarely hear about, I'm not saying that there's no crime in Indiana, but I feel like people know you don't go to Indiana with that BS, right? Because they're not going to put up with that N-word shit, okay? And I say N-word and it applies to everybody, black, white, that ratchet shit. So I'd like to think if there was a Republican mayor, or if Chicago was a red state, you know, red city, or we were a red state, I would like to think that they would reel it in a little bit more.
But
you know,
how? That's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I'm all for it. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm always fascinated. What would Republicans do differently? And I could care less who gets the job done. Nobody wants homicides, you know. But, I mean, we're talking about cities like Chicago where cops know they're going to get shot at, right? Like,
that's not true. Cops don't know that. People are not shooting at cops in Chicago.
In Chicago?
Yes, in Chicago.
They are in Oakland.
Violence is down in Chicago. Murders are down in Chicago. But to Nash point about Indiana, Gary, Indiana is a violent place where they...
Well, Gary definitely is an exception. Sorry, go ahead.
East Chicago, Indiana, you know what I'm saying? Indianapolis, South Bend, there are several cities in Indiana that are violent where, like there's no answer to it. But like a lot of the problems in Chicago stem from Indiana.
That's the thing.
Because people buy guns in Indiana and come right over the border and sell them. Because it's hard to buy legal, it's hard to buy guns in Illinois, particularly in Chicago. So all the guns are coming from Indiana. So they act like Indiana is like got some solution. They really don't.
Well, here's my thing. Let me tell you something about Chicago. Chicago is easy on every corner, and yet they can't solve one crime, right? Which is a big trick bag. I feel like Chicago, were they part of the fun police narrative? I feel like if it was a Republican-ran city, we wouldn't have. And Hakima, I'm not saying every liberal leader in Chicago is about to fight police, but there was that narrative at the height of George Floyd. You had some saying it. Just this past year, how many town hall meetings did we have of Chicago voters expressing their anger at the mayor and the governor over the immigration issue? I feel like if Republicans were in control, that wouldn't be a thing. We wouldn't have, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Republicans are perfect because I don't identify as Republican, right? And I know, I remember during Trump's last election how some of my family members were gravely impacted by some social services that were cut because of Republican leadership or Republican policies. Specifically, I have family members that have children who have disabilities, and some of those programs they relied on to help their children, and they lost access to some of those resources. But I just think as it relates to law and order, conservatives seem to be more pro-law and order than liberal leaders tend to be. And again, I'm not saying that applies to all liberal leaders.
Well, I would also say that it's hard to know what would really take place because in large cities you don't see Republicans as mayors. It would be interesting to see large cities ran by Republicans. We do have examples, a few examples of where this is true. You could go back to Rudy Giuliani. I think is probably the best example of what you're talking about, where better outcomes happen. But the challenges in a big city are just different than in the suburbs and different from rural communities. And I think it's interesting that in a big city, you tend to see Democrats being favored, and in the rural areas, you definitely see the Republicans being favored. And then in the suburbs, that tends to be the most purple that you're going to get. And then depending on how close your suburb is to the big city, it might lean blue, and if your suburb is leaning more towards the rural area, it might lean a little more red. But that's the thing I think we should think about is instead of just thinking of red or blue or this state, that state, I think we should really hone in on the different policies that are necessary for governing, that the wants, the needs of the people in these different areas are different. Yes, everybody wants to be safe, but the threats and the challenges that you're faced with, they're just different. And that's why I think we should more thoughtfully move towards what would be the best set of laws to govern a rural area. And by the way, not all rural areas are the same, and not all big cities are the same. We need to examine the unique challenges. There's a through line, though. If you have less tolerance for violent crime, you're going to see less violent crime. And the evidence of that is, a lot of people hate the 94 crime bill, and I think that there's definitely some mistakes made with it. But if you look at the facts that 1990, 1991, 1992, 1993, that 4-year period, the most violent period in American history outside of the Civil War. And so those violent crime rates were insane. In fact, today when people talk about crime rates, we're actually 50% lower than the highs that we saw in that 4-year period during the early 90s. And then the 94 crime bill comes, and then you see a steady decline ever since.
Giuliani had a plan, he's disgraced now, but it's called America's Mayor, maybe after 9/11. But he knew he couldn't do it by himself, and he organized the courts, the police, and other agencies,
unions,
and
signature
put together a group effort.
If I say Missouri,
And people welcomed it. I mean, New York was as bad as it is now.
everybody
And he
dies.
took over, and he made a profound change.
This change was, and to be fair, I think he's New York's mayor. I think any mayor that happens to be in New York with 9/11 happened to be would be
I don't know.
America's mayor.
You give me
But his
such knowledge.
biggest impact
Package.
was, I would actually love to see what the day-to-day
Son makes his father proud.
violent crime
And look at you, you're bigger than me now.
before his watch, and then under his watch, because I know his biggest impact
When the war comes,
was Regan
and it'll come.
going after John Gotti
When it will be
and
the one
organized crime.
who gets his enemy to trust him.
Being even just
How do
cleaning
I
up,
do that?
the mob was
You saved his life.
running, I believe it was the district. He cleaned that up. He was like the first mayor, I think, to really take up
Crew's taking steam tomorrow.
organized crime.
What's your name?
I forgot what point in his career he completely lost his fucking mind, but just goes to show.
He did have a multifaceted approach, and I think that you could ask anyone who went through that era, it was a profound change. It wasn't just statistics, and maybe it happened.
7 cards start. Let me ask you something. You ever dream about this guy? I do. Every night. Nightmares.
Yeah, there's not a lot of things like that. Also, the cops can only do so much, right? It's like, oh, look, the cops, look at morale, the cops, all these things. We're fine. Let's look at the Democratic Party on a microscope.
Come on, it's my turn. Here you are.
Criminal to the jail.
Hey.
That you can't make him stay. That's up to the DA. Who then has to deal with the judge, who has the power, of course, to release them on their own recognizance, release them on mercy, whatever it is. That's why I always thought it amazing when you get those flyers to vote for your local judges coming up on elections. Anyone really knows anything about those judges? There are some folks that do deep dives and do a history of judges' records and show you in bold prints how many known offenders they've let go for whatever reasons, political or otherwise, to get reelected. But it's not all up to the cops on the street to get it done. That we're absolutely sure.
I don't know that this is the solution, but there are fundamental knowledge that thinks appointed judges would be better than elected.
Appointed judges are better than elected. We should also not elect MTAs and stuff, in my opinion. I think, you know, you get low enough in the chain of offices, like, you know, I grew up in North Carolina, we elected like the water commissioner. Like nobody knows what the water commissioner is doing. Like you have to have, you should elect executives and a legislative body, and at some point, just because life is too busy, turn over that kind of oversight of the water commissioner to them. It makes a whole lot more sense.
So wait, I'm sorry, Brent, you said we should not, who should be appointed, not elected?
But this applies to a lot of like lower offices. Pennsylvania's got a weird system where you have a lot of like really low level positions that any other state would simply have appointed into a committee, and they would look for people that have knowledge, skill, or ability in a particular area. And but in Pennsylvania, you put yourself on the ballot, sometimes unopposed, you end up winning, and you know nothing about the job that you're about to do. I know about this because the Libertarian Party, when I was a part of it, we organized around that, and in one election got over 150 Libertarians elected. That was in 2021, and it exploited a few things. Number one, the major parties needed to declare their candidacy before the minor parties, so then you can find elections where there's only one opponent, or find elections where you're completely unopposed. And then once you get on the ballot, if the major parties, after that period is over, if they want to run, they would have to be a write-in, and then they're at a huge disadvantage. The other thing is the filing fees are very, very low in Pennsylvania, and so and then the final piece is just the fact of some of the low-level positions that you have. It just created a hell of a lot more openings, and so 150 elections won by Libertarians in 2021 alone.
Which I'd be happy to vote for a Libertarian, but probably you just need the best quality person to be a water commissioner that you can get, or whatever job it is. Like some of the very, very, very low level positions aren't partisan at all. You are based on your ideological thought. They are just like blocking and tackling basic governance positions.
Brent, can I ask you a question? If you were made king of America or king of the world, you know, what would you do for your people?
Create a system that maximizes economic prosperity and maximizes human you know, freedom for things like violence. I think in big picture we got a pretty good system that gets pretty close to that.
What's economic? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joan.
Oh, sorry. I would really, capital REALLY, educate them. That's not happening. It's just not happening.
So you think we have a pretty good system? Is $37 trillion in debt a pretty good system? If that was a business and you created $37 trillion in debt and created no savings for your citizens whatsoever, you think that's a pretty good system, huh, Brent?
Yeah, I think having a system where per capita wealth is the highest the highest in human history, that, you know, keep on expanding human, you know, on scale and expanding human lifespan. I think it's a pretty good system that we've developed in human history, and it is much more damaging to knock it all down than to not understand how lucky we are to be born and alive in 2025 versus an earlier period in history.
Well, what if you were able to participate in the economy from, let's say, 1870 to 1900? I would argue that was a
pretty good time as well.
You mean periods where there was significant economic growth, but you'll always point to, because we were still a developing economy, that we had higher year GDP growth than we do now, which you see throughout the world in development economies, which were that period.
Yeah, it's the biggest expansion of an economy in the history of the world.
Yeah, and a dollar is a 100% growth if you have $2. Same effect with the economy. Like going from a relatively poor economy, industrializing and doubling that size, or having double-digit growth is something you saw in America during that period, and frankly you see in many other developing economies. So it's nothing. I think, but let me finish one second. You're still much better off living in a period post that economic development and in the time we are living in.
Interesting. So post the economic growth of 1870 to 1900. So just so we're clear, the economic growth was possible because of massive deregulation, and so that allowed businesses to do what they needed to do in order to grow. And then following that period of time, we had massive restrictions that were put in place. And then shortly after that, come 1929, we had the biggest financial collapse. During this financial collapse, preceding that was a period of heavy regulations, and extending that depression was the fact that we doubled down on even more regulations. And so the evidence is very clear that if you want to grow the economy, you have to deregulate. If you want to crash an economy, you overregulate.
Hey, Roger, it's pretty ironic that you say the largest expansion was 1870, 1900, and that was when they freed the slaves, and those same people not only didn't get reparations, but they were excluded from that economy.
Well,
So
it's also evidence of the erroneous claim that this country was built on the free labor of slavery. It was actually more expensive to house and to feed human beings than it was to pay them. And so economically, slavery was a bad thing. We know that. Not only was it immoral, it was economically a bad thing. And so once they were freed and the market was deregulated, we were able to see a massive expansion in this country, and the quality of life went up for everyone.
And just to be clear, we had several periods of pretty sharp economic downturn in the 1880s, 1890s, and even the early 1900s. I believe we had a downturn in 07. So this period is also known as boom and bust period, where you aggregate greater economic growth, which is not something uncommon you see in industrializing economies. You see that actually over and over again. But you also had this period of with sharp economic downturns.
Yeah, the point stands that during that 30-year period, it's the biggest expansion of an economy in the history of mankind, period.
And I guess we're just disagreeing on the causal reason.
Well, so would you disagree that deregulation was a huge part of that?
I guess I would.
Okay, so you would have been able to solve these
Fighting and breaking law. What's cost money? I wanted to be one of you. I wanted to join the Brotherhood, but you sold me off. Like a slave. Do you know what she did to me? She strapped me down on the bed. She stripped me naked.
Sounds all right so far.
I put leeches on me.
Was she naked too? Leading your blood?
Yes, thank you, I know that.
It's gonna be worse.
She wanted to kill me. And they would have killed me if it wasn't for them.
Did they? So what you're whinging about?
I'm not whinging.
Your lips are moving. You're complaining about something. That's whinging. Friends who have been killed 6 times, you don't hear him bitching about it. Glad.
You still mad at us, boy?
So, what shall we talk about, gang? Kima, what's on the docket?
Not sure. It's up to the room. Stay where we was at, but move around.
I don't know who needs to hear this, but the new Final Destination movie is finally on HBO. If that's anybody's work.
So it's just but I think all the sessions are good. It's just you right. Who makes the last decision on whether or not something is true? Who makes the final decision on whether or not something is true?
Do you agree with that statement?
Notwithstanding.
Well, why the fuck I see you? Why the
If it depends on the diagnostic is systematic. Because it infects minds.
Hello?
It's pure nature.
Hello?
Are you okay?
Are you okay?
Of course I'm okay. I'm trying to figure out why the fuck you.
Kind of really dumb to get close to being anti-Semitic. Is that? And that's why sometimes I don't know, it really, I become so, it's ignorant also, it's not, it's ignorance. It's ignorance more than anything, it's ignorance. Really, I stand in awe sometimes when I reflect and I say, how did you escape alcohol? How did you escape? It's just once you get exposure, that's it. You can't look back. You can't. And people say to me, many times, even all this application, people say, Alpha, you come on too strong. You know, yes, I have to. You have no idea what this indoctrination does to you. You have no idea. There were times, there were times I was living with fascism. There were times I was in front of the TV and I would cry and say, what they're gonna do,